In the name of the one who is all in all. Amen. Amen. Last week, I jokingly said that if for some reason Brother Mark, who was to preach, couldn't make it at the last minute, I would offer this very short sermon that Bill and I once heard at a church in Tupelo, Mississippi. The preacher began by saying that silence is God's first language. He followed that up by adding, so let's all sit in silence for 5 minutes and listen for God. Bill and I looked at each other and Bill said, I don't think that guy has a sermon. I nodded, chuckled, and later we agreed that I might want to keep this idea in inventory in the event I ever found myself in such a situation. In retrospect, I think the preacher actually had a powerful and important message. Today's short gospel passage packs a similarly powerful and important punch. In it, we have another setup, like the one between the rich man and poor Lazarus in the reading a few weeks back, or like the one between Martha and Mary, or about the one between the Samaritan and the priest. Jesus often uses what seems like straightforward good, bad, right, wrong dualities to illustrate much deeper points. In this morning's parable, Jesus is at it again, and the players are a Pharisee and a tax collector. We hear this parable, and most of us, if we are honest, probably can put ourselves in both roles. God, thank you so much. I am not like so-and-so. I do all these good things. I check the best boxes on the how to be a good Christian list. Similarly, most of us know in our heart of hearts and soul of souls that we fall short regularly, that we separate ourselves from God, from each other, and from our best selves, that we sin and are in great and constant need of God's mercy and grace. This is one of those very tricky teachings. It is tricky because the second we identify too closely or extremely with either of these attitudes and behaviors, we are in reality doing the opposite. Let me explain. When we align ourselves with the Pharisee, we are being prideful and dismissive and not humble in relation to the tax collector. However, when we look down on the Pharisee for his prideful and dismissive remarks toward the tax collector, we are not being humble. We are being judgmental toward the Pharisee and exalting ourselves in relation to his attitudes and behavior. We are being humble or humbling ourselves in order to exalt ourselves. So what is a body who is trying to follow Jesus and fight the good fight and finish the race and keep the faith, as Paul writes to Timothy, to do? Sometimes discipleship can seem like a darned if I do and darned if I don't undertaking that paralyzes us. We get stuck on our interpretation of the good fight, of the race that is set before us, of keeping the faith. And therein lies the problem. We cause our own paralysis by not trusting God to take care of what is God's business, not ours. We focus on the faults and failings of others instead of doing the work we've been given by God to do. When we do this, we are trying to do God's job for God. So, of course, we become either paralyzed in our confusion, or we hurl ourselves even more fiercely into what may be a false fight, or we turn away from faith and abandon it altogether, rather than striving to keep it. Being a disciple of Jesus does not mean we are to do God's job. It does mean we are to work with and for God and God's people, with what we as individuals have been given. In order to work with and for God or anyone else. We have to listen. And in order to listen, we have to be silent. Which brings me back to where I began. Not surprisingly, theologians argue about silence because they pretty much argue about everything. Its efficacy, import, and who claimed silence to be God's first language. Was it John of the Cross in the 16th century? Or Thomas Keating, the monk credited with reviving the contemplative tradition of centering prayer in the 20th century? As you may know, I am a big proponent of contemplative prayer, of silent prayer. But silence is not an end in itself, nor is it superior in any way as a kind of prayer. There is no superior form of prayer. Any and all prayer that emanates from our authentic selves is the best possible prayer. And saying God's first language is silence is not the same thing as saying that silence is God's primary language. In Genesis, speaking is how God creates, and God continues to speak in ongoing creation with us as co-creators. As individual creations, as unique creatures, we have an individual and God-given and unique race to run and fight to fight, and yes, faith to find and keep. As long as we try to do God's job for God, rather than trusting God to pour out God's Spirit on all flesh, we will be missing out on living God's dream. We will waste precious time and energy. We will squander our God-given gifts. An Episcopal priest, Gary Jones, leads an online contemplative chapel. He recently referenced a passage from The Showings, also known as the Revelations of Divine Love, by the medieval English mystic Julian of Norwich. Julian writes that when the sins of others come to mind, the soul, whom Julian calls she, should flee from such thoughts as she, that is the soul, would run from the worst possible punishment. Rather than engaging such thoughts, we should seek within God for the remedy to help her resist this impulse to judge. For when we pay attention to the faults of others, a thick mist descends over the eyes of the soul, and for the time being, we cannot see the beauty of the divine. The only exception to this is when we view other people's imperfections with sorrow on their behalf, with sincere compassion for them, and with the holy desire for God to be with them. Last Sunday, Brother Mark encouraged us to resist the impulse to judge, and here it is again. I'm not sure we can be reminded of this too often, because what Jesus and Julian and Brother Mark and Luke and Paul are teaching us is only too true. When we pay attention to the faults of others, a thick mist descends over the eyes of our souls, and for the time being, we cannot see the beauty of the divine. Would you rather see the faults of others or the beauty of the divine? Next time we find ourselves dwelling on someone else's faults and failings, why not ask God to help us view them with sincere compassion and ask God to be with them, and then let it go, let it go, let it go. 3 people arrived at the pearly gates, knowing that in God's house there are many mansions. The first person is told to go to door number 3, but to be very quiet when passing door number 1. The second person is told to go to door number 2, but is also told to be very quiet when passing door number 1. And then the third person is told to go to door number 4, but also to be very, very quiet when passing door number 1. Person number 3 asks the pearly gatekeeper, why the need to be quiet? To which the pearly gatekeeper replied, "The residents there think they're the only ones here." Whenever you think of someone whose imperfections, according to you and your perceptions, annoys you greatly or causes you to look down on them or condemn them, remember the phrase, "all God's children," as a prompt to view that person as a fellow child of God and a bearer and sharer of the beauty of the divine. Try to think of one positive attribute, no matter how small, that person has. I realize this may not be easy, and you may not be able to do it all the time, but at least recognize that it is you, not that person, that is creating the thick mist over your soul, and perhaps depriving you of a precious, precious moment in which to glimpse, in which to see divine beauty. Amen.